Welcome back, my spookies.
Horror at the Hexagon
Tonight
House
we have
Inn
a full-on
by Bill
haunted
Spears.
buffet. 6 stories, one right after
September
the other,
24th,
like walking down a
1934.
hallway where every door
my dear
is
friend,
slightly
Robert
ajar,
Hoffman.
and something
Your
on the
favorite
other
writer
side
of weird fictions is a
breathing.
cowboy now.
We've got
That's
an
right.
old inn with
I,
a room
Henry
nobody
Noble, and my
wants to
lovely
talk
wife
about.
Victoria
We've
have
got an
moved
abandoned
from the great
house
city of
that
Chicago
turns a
to an
YouTuber's
up-and-coming
easy
Texas
content
town
into a
called
nightmare.
Black Springs.
We've got a
You
county
may ask
fair
why
that
we've
leads
moved.
to a mansion.
The move
that
was
doesn't
because
play
Victoria has
by
been
the
suffering
rules
from a
of
persistent
time.
cough for months.
Then we're going
and
thrifting
doctors have
because
recommended that we
nothing
move
screams
to a drier
good decision
climate.
like bringing
So,
home a
Goodbye,
cursed
Great
bowl
Lakes, and hello
for
to a
$1.
town that has no
And just
natural
when you
water
think
source
you're safe,
other than a creek.
We're taking
that
a
is 10
detour
miles
to
away.
the most haunted
Black
place of
Springs
all.
is a town that
a
seems
chain
to be
restaurant
prospering more than
where
many
the
others
ghosts are
from the
hungry
recent oil boom.
and the vibes
While the country
are
seems to be
rancid.
in a recession,
We're ending
you
in
couldn't
the woods
tell it here.
where a house
The name
shouldn't
even
exist,
comes from the oil boom.
and the things
The story
inside
I've heard is that
definitely
Black Springs was
shouldn't
named
either.
New Munich
So,
when the community was
grab a
discovered by
blanket,
German immigrants
lock the door,
in 1859.
and if you hear
the
something
name was changed in
tapping on the window,
1917 when loathing
it's
of the
probably
Kaiser by the
already
Scotch-Irish
too
citizens
late.
that took over the
So,
population
good
and
luck.
the discovery of oil
we
in the
feature
area
a brand new
caused them
scary
to change the
story
name
every single
to Black
Wednesday,
Springs.
all year
It's
long.
no secret that the
so make
history
sure
of
you're
Texas
subscribed on your
economics is
favorite
a bloody one
podcasting
between
app.
cattle drives
We'll be happy to
and
have
fence
you.
cutter wars.
Now,
This
let's
newest
get into
chapter
it.
is no different. On the outskirts of oil boom towns, there are acres of tent cities where the roughnecks live while working in this county. At night, the roads are filled with miscreants and robbers that are looking to take advantage of the roughnecks that are reaping great rewards for the incredibly long hours they are working. Bars and beer joints are being erected overnight to tempt the roughnecks out of their pay. It's not unusual for gunfights to happen at these establishments. Here we are, 3.5 decades into the 20th century, an age of civility, and these men are living like they were in the outlaw West. Don't let my previous paragraphs worry you too much about my safety, though. If you take out the bars, robbers, tent cities, and oil derricks, Black Springs and Samuel County are quite beautiful. There's an opera house downtown that they are installing a screen and movie projector into. It will be the first movie theater in this area. That's not all. There is legend that the opera house was opened by John Wilkes Booth after he escaped death. Imagine the absurdity of the assassin of my home state hero escaping a burning barn and gunshot to the neck to open an opera house in Texas. Our lodging is quite remarkable as well. We're staying in room 2 of the Hexagon House Inn. This beautiful structure was built at the turn of the century and has 6 identical sides, each with balconies and 3 gables. Each gable has a 5-pointed star above a peaked window. The upstairs area has 6 rooms, 1 for each side of the inn. The rooms form a sort of circle, so room 1 is next to room 6. Each room is complete with a king-sized bed and a fireplace, complete with a sitting area with 2 comfortable chairs. I have never seen anything like this and refuse to believe that an inn this remarkable exists anywhere else in the world. The inn is owned by a couple named Cartwright. They also live downstairs and are great company. In closing, I hope that you are doing well in California. Tomorrow morning I will start my new job as a ranch hand, because we both know that the delayed payments from Weird Fictions magazine are not going to be enough to support my wife and myself. Your friend, Henry Noble. October 25th, 1934. Dear Robert Hoffman, I'm glad to hear that all is well with you, and I did enjoy your story that was published in the last issue of Weird Fictions. The owner of the local pharmacy was kind enough to stock the magazine when I requested it. It turns out that it is quite the seller with the roughnecks that frequent the store for Benzedrine and sleeping pills. I'm honestly surprised these Scotch-Irish barbarians know how to read. They have finished installing the screen and the projector in the opera house, and it is now officially a movie theater. This weekend, for Halloween, the new Universal Pictures movie, The Black Cat, will be showing. It's based on the Edgar Allan Poe story. I hope the opera house isn't truly haunted by John Wilkes Booth. He might decide to shoot me, confusing me with another Republican from Illinois. My new job as a ranch hand on the Thalia Ranch is going well enough, but I fear that I am not entirely cut out for the work. It is hard labor and long hours. I have never ridden a horse before, so the experience I have to offer is limited. I feel like a burden because the other hands are constantly having to stop to teach me things that seem to come naturally to most people born down here. My writing has been suffering because I have hardly any time to devote to it. Working in the oil field is not a suitable alternative. Perhaps I can take up work as a soda jerk for the local drugstore. Victoria is ever supportive of whatever I wish to do. She received an inheritance years ago, and it helps us greatly. Thank you for asking about Victoria's cough. It has gotten so much better since we've moved to Texas. It has virtually disappeared in the past month. Speaking of Victoria, I do understand that this letter will find its way to you sometime after Halloween, but I have a great ghost story to share with you that involves Victoria. It's not a weird fictions yarn either. It's a real ghost story. For the past 2 weeks, I've woken up in the middle of the night, and Victoria was not in bed with me. For the first few nights, I went back to sleep and paid her absence no mind, and returned to my slumber. On the 4th or 5th night, however, I let my curiosity get the best of me and began looking for her. I would find Victoria in room 4 of the inn. The room is currently unoccupied, as Victoria and I are the only lodgers at the moment. Victoria is spending these nights in room 4, sitting by the fire talking. The chair she's been sitting in has its back to the door, so she hasn't seen me standing there. There was no indication of who she had been talking to, though. The other chair was completely empty. It's like she was talking to herself, but that is an impossibility because she has been slipping into speaking German at times. I have never known Victoria to speak any other language. Last Sunday morning over breakfast, I asked Victoria about her fireside chats. She said she has no memory of what I'm talking about. She's firmly convinced that she's sleeping through the night. She even went as far as to tell me that the past few weeks were the best she's slept in years and only knows of going to sleep and waking up. Then I mentioned to her that I heard her speak in German. Victoria replied, "I don't even know German," in a laugh, as if I were making the whole thing up as a joke on her. But then she paused. I have been having dreams of a German priest, though. Do you think that it's possible that Victoria is dreaming of a ghost? Or possibly that this is a case of possession? I feel like I should be keeping a record of this, then maybe I too can have a new story published in Weird Fictions. Your friend, Henry Noble. November 30th, 1934. Dear Robert Hoffman, your favorite writer of weird fictions is no longer a cowboy. That is correct. I am now a legitimate soda jerk. I do hope that I can perform this job to the best of my abilities. All joking aside, I received your letter Wednesday and do appreciate your support in my ghost situation. I felt you would best understand the situation out of all of our circle of weird fictions writer friends. The others all love to write about the supernatural, but I doubt any of them truly believe in the things they write about. It is now a cool November Friday afternoon, and I am riding in the cool air while sitting on the porch of the inn. Yesterday was Thanksgiving. I hope your holiday was well. Mine was educational. Mr. and Mrs. Cartwright are a couple in their 40s that never managed to have children. On Thanksgiving, they invited Victoria and I to join them and the family of Mr. Cartwright's brother for Thanksgiving dinner. Mr. Cartwright's brother, David, lives in San Antonio, where he has a practice as a doctor. David, his wife, and 2 teenage sons are also staying in rooms 5 and 6 of the inn for the weekend. During the dinner, I brought up Victoria's sleepwalking and dreams. As strange as it seems, I've actually never mentioned these things to the Cartwrights before. Only to you. I really haven't seen a point in mentioning them. The sleepwalking hasn't been a bother for weeks. Victoria denies it even happens, claiming she's been sleeping soundly. I've gotten used to it and am able to sleep through it. At the mention of dreams of a German priest, Mr. Cartwright and his brother David both fell silent. I took this as a rather ominous sign. So, after dinner, I made it a point to catch David on the porch while he was smoking his pipe. I wanted to find out if there was more to this. I really couldn't think of any way to lead in with it, so I just started talking, hoping that he would bring up the topic. It took a bit, but the conversation came around when David asked me how long Victoria and I were planning on staying at the inn. As long as we can. We really haven't discussed whether we should stay here or go back to Chicago. Have you thought of finding another place to stay in the meantime? Does this have to do with Victoria's dreams? David fell silent. He was looking for an excuse for us to leave that didn't involve whatever he was hiding. When he realized that there wasn't one, he asked, "Do you believe in the supernatural?" I answered that I did. I think there's something supernatural in that house. I think it's been here since 1917. Why 1917? I asked. In 1917, the Catholic Church built that little chapel out on the east side of town. I don't know why they even built it. Everyone in town is either German families that immigrated to Texas during the days of the impresarios or Scotch-Irish by way of Tennessee. The Germans are Lutheran, and the Scotch-Irish are Baptist. There's no Catholics. Anywho, they sent a priest, a German named Father Johann Bauer. Not like the Germans that were already here and have been here since the town was founded. This was a German from Germany. You can imagine that didn't go over very well since the Great War was going on at the time. We were in the middle of changing the name of the town because even the Germans living here didn't want to be associated with Germany. People said things about him. Some said that the Catholics didn't even build the church, that it was the Kaiser that had built it, and that the priest was a spy for the Kaiser. That made sense to a lot of people. Father Bauer was having a hard time finding any place to stay. None of the boarding houses would have him. No one wanted to rent or sell to him. My parents owned the inn at the time and weren't in any position to turn down anybody. So he stayed here, in room 4. I was 22 at the time and working here part-time and at the pharmacy part-time trying to save up for medical school. There was a pause. It was almost as if David needed a push to go further, so I asked him, what happened to Father Bauer? That church is about 1.5 miles from here. Father Bauer would walk it every day. I still don't see why. No one else was setting foot in the place. But he walked there every morning and then back here every evening. One morning he left for the church, but didn't come back that evening. He just disappeared? I asked. In a town this small, nobody just disappears. You hear talk about what happened to people. What talk did you hear about what happened to Father Bauer? He was lynched. You mean he was hanged? I was disgusted. I had heard stories of people being hanged here in the South, but the tales I'd heard usually involved the person being hanged also being accused of horrible crimes. I couldn't imagine someone being hung over paranoid rumors. Not all lynchings are hangings, David continued. In Father Bauer's case, he was tarred and feathered. I have lived my entire life in Chicago where the police handle matters. Lynchings of any sort are not common. I was trying to imagine someone being tarred and feathered. I had always heard of this as a metaphor for humiliation, not a lynching. David saw the confusion in my face and began to explain. When someone is tarred and feathered, it's supposed to hurt and scar, but not kill. The tar has to be hot enough to stick to the skin and the feathers. That's about 350 to 400 degrees at least. There was a group of about 6 men that waited for Father Bauer between the church and here that evening. From what I understand, the goal was never to kill him, just to hurt him bad enough to make him want to leave. Something went wrong, though, and he ended up dead. From what I heard, the body was buried with the feathers still melted to the flesh. David Cartwright went on to tell me that the Catholic Church sent a new priest the following spring, this time an Irishman, so those types of rumors wouldn't spread again. David said he moved to San Antonio the following fall, and tries not to think of Father Bauer. I hope that my story hasn't lowered your spirits too much. I fear that this story might be too gruesome for even the pages of Weird Fictions if I were to try to turn it into a story for the magazine. I felt that I must write you while it was still on my mind, since it seems to relate to Victoria's new sleeping habits. I really want to get this to you as soon as possible, and it is early enough that I can walk to the post now and send it. Henry Noble. February 19th, 1935. My friend, Robert Hoffman. It has been months since I have written to you, and if you responded to the letter I sent you during Thanksgiving, I never received it. I have been institutionalized and imprisoned since the night that I placed that letter in the post to you. Robert, you are the only one that will believe me, and I have tried to explain to others what happened, but they locked me up in a sanitarium in North Texas where I was drugged and unable to communicate with the outside world. I spent months in that dreaded place, surrounded by people who couldn't even form a sentence. Screams of the mad filled the hallways at night. They thought I was mad because of the story I told them, but the place they sent me to cure me was driving me mad. I'm getting far ahead of myself, though. I need to start with that night, the night that you last heard from me. The evening was very normal. After I returned from placing the letter in the post, we sat in the parlor visiting. The Cartwrights, David's family, Virginia, and myself. The Cartwrights had a bottle of Kentucky bourbon that they shared with us. Around midnight, a thunderstorm rolled in. We wound things down and retired to our rooms. I fell asleep easily with the bourbon in my system and Victoria beside me. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was sleeping heavily, regardless of the storm. Suddenly, I was awakened by a stark, blood-curdling scream, the scream of a woman. I bolted upright, reaching my hand beside me. Victoria wasn't there. The storm was still raging outside. I got to my feet and rushed to the door, reaching for the electric switch next to it. I flipped the switch up, then down, then up again. But there was nothing. The storm had knocked out the electricity. I rushed back to bed with only the flashes of lightning to guide me. There was a kerosene lamp and a box of matches on the bedside table. I was so shaken by the scream and Victoria missing that I had trouble striking the matches. It took me 5 matches before I was able to keep one lit long enough to light the lamp. I then returned to the door and took a deep breath to steady myself before I pulled the door open. The light of the lamp could only illuminate so far, so I stepped out of the room. I was still at a loss of who made the scream or what caused them to make it. My intentions were to make it to rooms 6 and 5 to check on David Cartwright's family. I knocked on the door of room 6 where the teenage sons of David were staying. I knocked on the door, and it creaked open. I called into the room. "Hello!" There was no answer. I put my hand with the lamp into the room and followed it with my head. My dear friend Robert, I wish I could forget the sight I saw, but it will haunt me till the day I die. The bodies of the 2 teenage boys were laid on the floor at the foot of the bed, one on top of the other, the foreheads of each of them split open, as if by an axe. There were 2 streaks of blood running from the bed to the bodies. They were killed, then dragged to the floor. I gasped. This was a horrific scene, but it couldn't have been the source of the scream that I heard. It was a woman's scream. I mustered up courage to get past what I had seen and continued to room 5. Once again, I knocked and the door creaked open. I repeated the entry I used in room 6 with the lamp entering the room before me. The sight of David Cartwright and his wife was even more startling to me than the sight of their sons. David was lying face down on the bed with large cuts all over him. He must have been attacked by the same axe that his sons were. He never stood a chance. He was probably dead before he could even wake up. His right arm was either under him or missing altogether. I couldn't bring myself to approach him to find out. I couldn't see David's wife until I moved the lamp to explore more of the room. There she was, bent over the chair, her back up in the air and the axe still in her, the handle pointing straight up. I gasped again, this time almost dropping the lamp. I turned and ran to the staircase. It crossed my mind to see if Victoria was in room 4. But the thought of finding her butchered by the axe in there was simply too much to bear. So instead I ran down the stairs. When I was halfway down the staircase, there was a lightning flash that revealed the contents of the foyer to me. It was the bodies of the Cartwrights, lying on the floor with Victoria above Mrs. Cartwright, a knife in her raised hand. Her back was turned to me. In that split second, I saw the hand come down. Then it was dark again, before I saw her plunge the knife into the chest of Mrs. Cartwright. This sight was too much, and I succeeded in dropping the lamp this time. It shattered and the kerosene splashed onto the steps. The open flame of the lamp caught the spreading kerosene and ignited. Victoria turned around, then ran towards me with the knife in her hand. In a lightning flash, her face changed from my Victoria to a man with a disfigured face. A burned face with feathers melted to it. My Victoria was Father Bauer in that flash of lightning. But then it was back to my Victoria when the flash was over. But it wasn't my Victoria, because whatever it was still came at me with the knife raised. I was caught off guard and fell backwards, sliding down the stairs, but I was able to gather myself enough to make it to my feet quickly. Victoria, now standing in front of me, raised her hand, then brought the knife down at me. But I caught her arm. The fire was beginning to build on the staircase above us, but Victoria was too concerned with stabbing, and I too concerned with us surviving, for either of us to notice. She spoke. It was not Victoria's voice, though. It was the voice of a demon, and it will haunt me until the day I die. The words that came from her made no sense. "Eldrikoth sees you!" The struggle took all of my strength, but I was able to push her to the side, into where the flames had spread. As her nightgown caught fire, I ran for the front door and escaped the house. I can only imagine Victoria's fate, being left in the house as it burned. I stood in the road watching the Hexagon House Inn engulfed in flames as the sheriff approached. I told him exactly what had happened, and he took me to the sanitarium. I feared I would die in that place, screaming the words, "Eldrikoth sees you!" But the sheriff returned for me and took me back to Black Springs for a trial. I thought that it would be an actual trial, but instead I was rushed into a courtroom and found guilty in less than an hour of murdering 7 people. I now sit on death row, this being my first correspondence since I last wrote you. You are the only person that will believe me. Please help. Henry Noble. The House That Killed Me,
by Bruce Haney. There are many different paths to fame that one can follow. You can get the attention you crave from writing, acting, directing, or posting to social media. There are some people who are famous just for posting photos of their lives online or making the exact same 10-second video on TikTok that everyone else already has. Brandon's attempt for fame took the video path. His channel was titled Abandoned with Brandon. Before his final video, he had built his channel up to 1,000 followers. After the final video was uploaded, his subscribership jumped up to 100,000, though everyone knew that he would never post another video. That final clip received 15 million views. Previously, his highest viewed video had 20,000 and was titled Overnight at the Witch's House. You see, Brandon's online niche was that he made abandoned places videos. The Witch's House was a surprise hit for Brandon, though 20,000 was nobody's idea of a hit anymore, but Brandon was proud of it. He had been making videos for just over a year, and this was his first taste of success. He was late to the game, he knew, but he just turned 20 years old and finally was free enough from his parents' hold to start traveling and doing with his life whatever he wanted. For him, that meant making the types of videos that he loved watching. He had been watching urban exploration videos since he was a kid. He still loved them, but he didn't realize that so many of the cool abandoned places had already been explored and exploited for online hits and likes. But the Witch's House did well. He just posted it a month ago, and he was getting new subscribers daily. 3 things led to the success of that video. The first was that this was a new abandoned place that nobody had seen. The second were the symbols he found inside. The third part of that success was the thumbnail he chose for the video. He took a photo from the kitchen into the bedroom where you could see the details of a face that looked like a witch. Web sleuths in the comments were able to figure out right away that it was not in fact a witch face, but a novelty item known as a laughing head that was sold in souvenir shops in the 1970s. The laughing heads were a gag item. They had a little reservoir in them that you filled with water, and if someone pulled the pull me string, it would spit water at them, and then a voice of someone laughing would play while the tongue moved in and out and the eyes opened and closed. Okay, it wasn't a real face, but those laughing heads were nightmare fuel with their black eyes, creepy laugh, and wrinkled skin. Now, with the little success his video got, the place had been discovered, and Brandon's favorite creator, The Forgotten Past, made a video there that got 500,000 views. If this was a few years ago, that number wouldn't be that notable. But abandoned videos are now passé, and having over 100,000 views for that type of video was great. The success of the Witch's House video led to his final production. A viewer with the online handle Lost and Alone sent him a message stating that he knew of a practically untouched abandoned house in eastern Oregon that hadn't been vandalized, had not been filmed, and, best of all, the owners abandoned the house, leaving everything behind. That's what got views. Nobody wants to see an abandoned house for the rot alone. They want to see how people used to live, or find glimpses of creepy things, like old rotten dolls or hidden rooms. Brandon corresponded back and forth with Lost and Alone, gathering info. He wanted to know how rotten the house was. He had never explored a house in Oregon because he heard that, because of all the rainfall, abandoned houses fell apart before they were old enough to be worth exploring. That's the Pacific Northwest for you. Brandon didn't know that eastern Oregon is mostly desert and got much less rain than the area surrounded by Portland did. Lost and Alone confirmed that it wasn't rotten and told Brandon where he could meet him so that they could drive out there together. Brandon didn't like this idea, but he desperately wanted to build on the success of the Witch House. Who knows, maybe they'll find creepy books and symbols on the walls there. It annoyed Brandon that people in the comments on his videos theorized that he drew the symbols himself. He didn't. He held the abandoned code of ethics sacred. Document, not destroy or alter. He considered himself an explorer, not a criminal. They met at a gas station 20 miles from the house. Lost and alone turned out to be a 22-year-old guy named Dan, who just started his own channel and thought he could benefit from making his first video with somebody who had already been doing it for a while. Before they left the gas station, Brandon informed Dan that he would follow him in his own car. Dan was okay with this, saying, "I just didn't want to give you the directions and then you make the video without me." "I get that. It's cool. I'm excited to see the place," Brandon responded. "Oh, you're going to love it. The house has been abandoned since the 60s, I believe. My father said it was abandoned when he was a little kid and that none of them dared go near it because it was supposedly haunted. You know, because of the murders and deaths," Dan explained. This made Brandon nervous as this was the first time this fact had ever been mentioned. He questioned Dan about it. "Murders? Plural?" Dan sighed and said, "Yeah, 5 people have died in the house." "Wow, did they catch the killer?" Dan sighed again and told him, "Yes and no. The first 2 people who died were killed by their mother after their father left. She resisted arrest when the police came and was shot and killed. The house hasn't had anyone live in it since." Brandon thought to himself, "What about the other 2 deaths?" The drive to the destination was rough, but the air conditioning in his car made it bearable. The heat was the only part of the exploration that he wasn't looking forward to. His dashboard informed him that the outside temperature was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The drive was 10 miles of asphalt, and then another 10 miles of gravel and dirt roads, some with pretty deep ruts. They saw only a handful of houses that looked abandoned as well, except for the late-model vehicles parked in the driveways. Brandon wondered to himself why someone would live out this far. The only other signs of life along the route were some grazing cows, some birds, and he thought that he may have seen a coyote. Being that this was the eastern part of Oregon and much of the land was empty, he found himself thinking about the old stagecoaches and schooners that probably traveled this way on their journey west to the more populated areas during the Oregon Trail days. Brandon then thought to himself, "I wonder how many people died of dysentery around here." Brandon's trip odometer, which he had reset at the gas station, showed that they had driven 18 miles. He was getting excited that they were almost there. That was when Dan stopped his truck in the road and jumped out and started walking towards Brandon. "Come check out the road. I don't know if your little car is going to make it past these ruts," Dan said. Brandon got out of his vehicle and cursed himself for not paying more to rent a pickup truck, or at least an SUV. What's another $50 on the credit card? Brandon walked up and looked at the rut, which was about 8 inches deep, and told Dan, "I think I can make that as long as I hit the rut at the right angle." With that, they both got in their respective vehicles. Dan drove right through the rut, but Brandon's rental car got stuck. After a bit of discussion, Brandon decided to jump in Dan's truck and continue. The car would be a problem for later. They could pull it out in the dark, but they couldn't film in the dark, so documenting the house was deemed more pressing. "We just have to watch out for the coyotes when we're pulling that car out," Dan told Brandon. "I always heard that coyotes don't really attack humans," Brandon replied. "Typically no, but my buddy got chased by one around these parts, and I've never quite trusted them ever since," Dan replied. Brandon was frustrated with himself for not being prepared and for taking an unnecessary risk in trying to drive through that rut. Those emotions drifted away when they got to the house. It was beautiful. It was a 2-story home in the Gothic style with a rusty wrought iron fence around it. The paint had long been beaten away from the wind and the sand, leaving a ghost of itself behind. Most of the windows were unbroken, and, since they are in the desert, no ivy or trees blocked the view of the architecture. It had the classic arched roof with the decorative trim that was mostly intact. Brandon thought this was a real lost gem and knew that it would make for a great video. Regardless of what they find inside, the thumbnail of the house alone would get him a ton of clicks, possibly more than the witch house video. This house has really been abandoned since the 60s and not vandalized? Brandon asked. Dan replied, "Like I said, everyone is scared of this house. My friends were afraid because of the 2 kids and mother who died here. Enough time had passed by the time I was a kid that people started to dare each other to go up to the house. But nobody lasts more than a few minutes in there. They would hear a creak or claim to hear a scream, and then they would run back outside." With a bit of backstory, Brandon was ready to film his intro. "What's up, fam? This could be the dream spot. If you thought the witch's house was cool, you're going to love this place." Brandon then took his camera and faced it towards the house for a brief second. "Check out that Gothic architecture. This place is sick. Hopefully it's as cool on the inside as it is on the outside. Before we go any further, let me give you a little history of this house, located in Eastern Oregon. That's all I'm telling you for a location. I don't want this place found and ruined." Before Brandon continued, he lowered his voice, knowing he should be a little more respectful and less animated when talking about the deaths. "This house has been abandoned since the 1960s, after a mother killed her 2 children and then was gunned down by the police. 5 people have died in this very house." Brandon suddenly realized that he didn't have the whole story. Thinking on his feet, he decided to ask Dan about the other 2 on camera. He knew he would show Dan at some point during the video to help him get some views since Dan helped him get to this spot. Brandon walked over to Dan with the camera facing the 2 of them and then started talking to the camera. "This is Dan from Lost and Found. Check out his channel. He's brand new. He found this spot, so I'm sure his channel is one you are going to want to follow. Link will be in the description below. So Dan, you said 5 people died in this house. You told me about 3 of them. Can you tell everybody about the other 2 said deaths?" Dan looked nervous as he made eye contact with the camera for the first time. "Yeah, it's really sad. Sarah and Adam were up here and it was..." Dan stammered a bit. He knew these people. "It was really sad. Adam was a buddy of mine and Sarah was cool. She was a cool person, and their bodies were found right in this house just a few weeks ago." Brandon looked over at Dan, shocked. This changed everything for Brandon. He couldn't film an abandoned video in a house where someone just died. Brandon turned off the camera and looked at Dan. "People died in that house a few weeks ago? I can't film in this house. That's fucked up. You should have told me that," Brandon said. "Why would that be an issue? I didn't think that would be an issue," Dan replied. Brandon was furious but tried to contain his emotions, since Dan did seem to know the last 2 people who died in the house. "The problem is that it makes me look like an insensitive asshole to film where someone just died." Brandon then stormed off, leaned against the truck, and put his head down, grabbing the top of it with his hands. Whenever he was really frustrated and needed to think his way out of a situation, this is what he did. After a moment, Brandon said, "Okay, tell me the story. Maybe I can make this work somehow." After a while, Brandon came up with a plan to lie and say that they heard a rumor that the house was going to be torn down because of the incident and that they have to document before that happens. Brandon didn't feel good about it, but this trip was costing him money and he couldn't walk away with the debt without at least getting a video out of it. "Okay, fam, so normally we wouldn't shoot in an abandoned place that had a recent tragedy, but the rumor going around is that this historic house that has never been documented is going to be torn down because of the incident, and I feel like it's my duty to film this place. This house looks amazing and it needs to be documented before it's gone." Brandon and Dan entered through the agape front door with their cameras in hand. Inside, they saw a typical 1960s living room, though it was in a state of disrepair. The glue that held the green-flowered wallpaper to the wall had long ago lost its strength, and much of it had peeled and fallen to the floor. Brandon was surprised by how intact the rest of the place was. The couch was still there in reasonable condition, though he could see where an animal had been chewing on it because of the off-white stuffing sticking out of one of the cushions. More impressive was that the television was still there. That was always the first thing broken by teens when they snuck into an abandoned house. The 4 legs holding it up looked worse for wear. They were chewed up. Probably rats, Brandon thought. But then again, he thought, if he even breathed on that television, those legs would give out. So maybe it was something larger. All he knew is that he better get some photos of it now, before it fell. Brandon turned off the recorder on his camera and started taking photos around the room for use online to promote the video. First the television, then a photo of the round analog wall clock with the peeling wallpaper around it. He thought about changing the time to midnight for the photo, but one lie was enough for this video. The next shot he wanted was a low-angle one of the blue couch while its white stuffing poked out. So he bent down and was working on getting just the right angle with his camera when he was startled by the unmistakable sound of footsteps above him. He looked around and realized that Dan was gone. What a relief. It must have been Dan, he thought. Then Brandon went back to framing his shot of the couch. That is when he saw her. Since he was framing an angled shot from below, the first thing he saw was her blue shoes and white socks. Her pale white legs were nearly as white as those socks. As he pointed his camera up, he saw that she had a blue dress that matches her shoes. She looked normal enough until he got to her shoulders, which were covered in blood. He saw the source of the blood when he looked up at her and revealed the bleeding dent in the side of her head. She stared back at him with her faint blue eyes. At first, he thought that her eyes were completely white, but he could just faintly make out the light blue irises. As he looked into her eyes, she began to open her mouth. Ah! A voice screamed from upstairs before the little girl could speak. Brandon was sure the scream was Dan's. He looked towards the stairs and then heard the girl on the couch say, "Get out, get out." Brandon swung his head back in her direction, but she was gone. Startled, Brandon threw his body away from the couch, landing on his butt, dropping his camera. He quickly pushed himself to a standing position. He was about to run out of the house until he remembered Dan's scream upstairs. Brandon ran up the stairs as fast as he could, forgetting his camera and forgetting to check the stairs for stability. Luckily for him, the stairs were okay. Unlucky for him and Dan, who was running down the stairs. Both were moving so fast that they ran right into each other. Brandon's momentum must have been a little more than Dan's because they were slammed upward on the stairs instead of down, which could have been deadly for both of them. Brandon was the first back up and he helped Dan to his feet. Before Brandon could get his story out, Dan started telling him what had happened. "Holy fucking shit, I saw a ghost!" According to Dan, he decided to go upstairs and film his intro so that when he talked to the camera, it wouldn't ruin Brandon's audio. Once he was upstairs, he found a great spot. It was a room that appeared to be a little boy's. A small twin bed sat up against one wall and, on the floor, he found little army men. Dan picked up a few of them and set them up on the dresser in a battle scene, thinking it would look good for the background for his intro. As he was doing this, he heard the floorboard behind him creak. He turned around expecting to see Brandon, but instead saw a small boy. The child looked normal enough, a bit pale, and his clothes were old-fashioned, brown shorts and a white button-up shirt. Dan asked the boy who he was. The little boy just looked at him and then walked past him. Dan turned to watch the boy, and that is when he saw that the back of the boy's head was bashed in. Dan could see the brain and that the blood from the skull had dripped down and turned the whole back of his shirt crimson. This was when he screamed. The boy then turned around and said nearly the same thing as the girl ghost had said to Brandon.
It's not safe. Get out.
That's almost identical to what happened to me. I say we should heed the advice, Brandon said. Brandon and Dan ran out of the house to Dan's truck. Dan started it and turned on the air conditioner. It's a bummer to not get a video out of this, but at least the AC feels great. Let's get out of here, Brandon said. We're safe. We're out of the house. Tell me what happened to you, Dan asked. Brandon told him the story about the girl with the dented head on the couch and how she too told him to get out. Why do you think they want us out of there? Dan asked. I don't know. Maybe they don't like the intrusion. They feel like it's their home. They might not even know they're dead, Brandon replied. Then a moment passed and Brandon continued. This is fucking crazy. Before today, I didn't even believe in ghosts. Now I'm trying to figure out their motivations? Dan looked over at Brandon and said, I wonder if my friends are ghosts too. Did they fail to listen to the warnings? So they paid the price? Fuck, I have to go back in, Brandon said. Why? Dan asks. I left my camera, Brandon replied, sighing in frustration. I'll go with you. You shouldn't be in that house alone, Dan said. Then, after a moment, he continued, even though that didn't protect Adam and Sarah. Dan opened his door and got out. You're not going to turn off the truck? Brandon asked. Dan replied, We'll just be in there a couple of minutes and I want to come back out to a nice, cool truck. Brandon entered the house and walked over to his camera right where he left it. After he picked it up, he looked it over to see if there was any damage. That was when Dan started yelling. Adam! Adam! Sarah! Are you here? Dan yelled while looking around the room. This angered Brandon. Dude, the fuck? You want to alert those creepy kids to our presence again? I have my camera, so let's go. Brandon yelled at him. Maybe Adam and Sarah are ghosts too, Dan replied. Well, I don't want to find out, and if so, I don't want to risk dying here and haunting a house in the middle of fucking nowhere. Suddenly, a fact hit Dan, and he expressed it to Brandon. They were found in the cellar. Dan then ran out of the room looking for access to said cellar. Brandon chased after him into the kitchen. Brandon couldn't help but notice how undisturbed and picturesque the kitchen was. He thought to himself, man, this would have been a cool video. Then he thought that maybe he should be recording this, just in case Dan goes psycho on him. Brandon then hit the red record button. Dan found the cellar. It was just off of the kitchen. He yelled for Adam and Sarah again as he swung the doors open and ran down the stairs. There wasn't much light, except what was streaming in from one of the exterior doors of the cellar. Brandon started to follow Dan down the stairs, but when he was halfway down, he heard two voices say, Don't! Brandon swung back around, camera in hand. His camera captured the two ghosts from earlier, though in his camera they were transparent. They continued to stare and then repeat the phrase from earlier. Get out! Then they added, or you'll be eaten! Brandon wanted to leave, but he needed to grab Dan. Plus, they were right in the way of him exiting out through the kitchen. So he stood stunned, not knowing what to do. But suddenly he heard a low growl, and then another, and then footsteps coming back up the stairs. Brandon looked behind him and could see Dan running up as two coyotes chased after him. Brandon turned back around, ready to run through the ghosts, but they were gone. Brandon and Dan ran up the stairs and back into the kitchen. He grabbed one of the metal-framed green-flowered patterned chairs and shoved it against the door to keep the coyotes from getting back in. "Let's get out of here, to the truck!" Brandon yelled. Dan didn't need to be told twice. Brandon started running and Dan followed right after, but their escape was stalled when they got to the front doorway and saw another coyote standing in their path. Seeing no other exit, they made the poor choice of running upstairs. As they ran, they heard the coyote following them. Once they got to the top landing, the two young ghosts appeared again, and then, in unison, they said,
"We tried to warn you."
This amplified the fear that Brandon and Dan were feeling to the point that they stopped in their tracks. The only thing that got Brandon moving again was hearing the screams of Dan behind him. Brandon ran, but stopped right before he was out of view of the stairs. He looked behind just in time to see the coyote, with its foaming mouth and sharp teeth, biting and tearing into the flesh of Dan's left leg. Dan screamed in agony as the coyote bit down hard and yanked him from the stairs. Dan's screaming did not stop when the coyote let go of him. His screams didn't stop until the coyote bit and ripped the flesh from his neck. Once Dan was dead, the coyote, with its blood-covered face, looked up the stairs at Brandon. After seeing this, Brandon ran to the first bedroom, the little boy's room. He closed the door behind him. Brandon felt safe momentarily. He at least had a little time to think. The room had a window, so he looked out to see if climbing was an option. It wasn't. There was nothing to hang on to, nothing to climb down, just a direct drop straight down. Brandon could see the truck with its headlights on. He thought about how nice that AC would feel as he drove away to safety. He thought, if I get out, I won't even come back for my rental car. It wasn't long before he heard growling and scratching at the door. Brandon sat on the little boy's bed and faced his camera towards himself. Well, I guess this might be it. I'm uploading this video uncut because it might be the last video I ever make. Sorry for the lack of music and clean cuts. Right now, I'm stuck in a room with no way to exit and a coyote trying to get in and eat me. I didn't know coyotes ever attacked humans. I also didn't know ghosts were real until today. Until this house. Brandon started to cry and then turned off the camera. Brandon fiddled with it to upload directly online, and when he was ready to submit it, he realized that he needed to title the video. First he typed, "The Ghost House," and then erased it. Then he typed, "Coyotes and Ghosts," and then deleted that. Finally he typed, "The House That Killed Me," and hit submit. An error popped up and said, "No internet connection. Video will upload when connected to Wi-Fi or cellular network." Brandon had few options for escape. He couldn't go out the window and he couldn't go out the door. He stomped around frustrated. Then the ghosts showed up again.
"Shh, be quiet,"
they said. Brandon's first thought was, fuck these ghosts. But then he realized they were right. If he stopped making noise, maybe the coyote would leave. This did seem to work after an hour when he heard the coyote get up and walk away. Before exiting, Brandon looked back out the window. It was now dark. He could see the headlights of the truck were still on, so he made his escape. He opened the door slowly and walked down the stairs even slower, making sure not to create any creaks. Just as he got to the bottom of the stairs, he saw Dan's mutilated and half-eaten body. Brandon wanted to scream, but thought to himself, how many coyotes are there? Brandon stepped over the body and made his way to the front door and stepped outside. Behind him, he heard Dan's voice. "Do you hear that?" Dan wanted to reply, "Hear what?" but he didn't want to make a sound. Brandon turned around towards the voice and saw the ghost of Dan, who then said, "I don't hear the truck running anymore." Brandon whipped his head around to look at the truck and was happy for a second because the lights were still on. They were dim, though. At that moment, Brandon realized that the battery would keep the lights on for a while after the motor had ran out of gas. Not knowing what to do, and at least knowing that the truck would be safer, Brandon ran toward it. He was within 10 feet when the already dim lights went out. "Fuck!" Brandon yelled. The coyotes heard that, and within seconds he was pounced on by 3 of them. Brandon and Dan's bodies were found a few days later, when 2 officers were out letting locals know that rabies was running rampant through the local population of coyotes. It seems that the test results came back from Adam and Sarah's dead bodies and confirmed that the bites were from a coyote and that traces of rabies were found. Later, after what remained of Brandon and Dan were taken to the morgue, their cell phones and cameras were taken in as evidence. At some point, a curious person turned on the camera, which connected to the open guest Wi-Fi of the restaurant next door, and the footage went online. Within a day, Abandoned with Brandon was trending, and Brandon had his first million-plus viewed video.
Ghost Story by A.N. Onimus. I remember it as if it were yesterday. I was young. I was young enough to taste the adventure, but old enough to know better. I'm still not sure how this was real. Too much happened and was seen to be the fanciful imagination of being young. One thing is for certain. I have not forgotten what happened that night. And I am certain I never will. It was fall. The leaves were just starting to turn. The days were still warm and the nights were getting cooler. The county fair had been in full swing and was the last night it was open. I was there because a friend had talked me into going, and I wanted to sample some kettle corn and caramel apples there. I was waiting in line for the popcorn when we saw him. He was a boy about my age and my size. He looked like any other boy there, except his clothes were funny. He looked like he was dressed up in old-time movie clothes. He was looking at us. My friend nudged me and nodded in his direction. We exchanged looks and began to walk toward him. As we began to walk, to my surprise, so did he, directly for us, without looking away. When we were within speaking distance, I nodded and said, "Hey." He nodded back and said, "Hello, my name is Jonathan. I'm from here, but have been elsewhere for a while. I don't know anyone here now." I told him he could go with us if he wanted to. He nodded. We spent the next couple of hours riding the roller coaster, the Ferris wheel, and the tilt-a-whirl, after which I thought I might hurl, but I managed to keep things together. We had found a bench to sit. Jonathan and my friend were working on some red vines when he asked if we liked scary things. We looked at each other and said, "Of course," as if we would reply any other way. He asked if we knew where the house was, down on Oak Street. He said he knew the house that was spooky down there. I was hesitant, but after some encouragement from Jack, we were soon headed out the gates from the fair, into the night. As we made our way down through some neighborhood streets, it had really began to cool off, and there was definitely a chill in the air. A breeze was picking up, and a few leaves were blowing in between our feet as we walked. We were beginning to get far enough away from the fair now that I began to become uncomfortable with the distance, even though I knew where we were. It was just then when he said, "We're here." This had startled me as I realized we had all been walking in silence. A glance from Jack told me he was no more at ease than I was. I had this strange feeling of foreboding, and in retrospect, I know now that my survival instinct was trying to warn me. As I looked at him, he stood looking up at it. The house was huge. I can't believe I had never noticed it before. It was a sprawling 3-story mansion with what appeared to have been a large yard all around it. It seemed to be well kept, but everything about it repelled me. I looked at Jack and the other boy. Jack was looking around nervously. The boy, though, he had a radiant smile on his face. I noted he was actually breathing hard. I asked him if he was all right. He snapped his head towards me instantly while taking a step toward me. "Yes," he said, then slowly retreated 1 step back again. "What do you think?" he asked. Jack was barely audible when he answered. "I don't think we should go in if that's what you mean." "Of course we should go in. I know who lives here. They aren't there yet," he said. I agreed with Jack and voiced my concern with getting into trouble. "There will be no trouble. Let's just go," the boy said, and with that, he began to walk up the walkway to the front door. I thought the walk to that front door was the longest 25 feet of my life. Every step forward seemed to get colder. The darkness enveloped us, and the air seemed to become still. The repulsion I felt going forward was immense and progressive. I didn't know why I felt like this. I didn't want to seem scared, but I was, and I didn't know why, which made me confused on top of the anxiety I seemed to be becoming overwhelmed with. I was following the new friend of ours and Jack. The boys seemed to be bursting with enthusiasm and excitement as Jack and I trudged along. As we approached the steps up, I took hold of the rail and realized my palms were sweating profusely. I became aware of my own labored breathing. I looked to Jack, who mouthed "No" at me as we were almost to the top step on the porch. My mouth was dry as I thought of 100 reasons not to open the large front door, but couldn't utter a single word. The boy stood in front of the door and turned to look at me. He simultaneously reached for the knob and turned it. I yelled, "No!" as he did, but to no avail, as we heard the click and the door began to swing open. The door creaked and groaned in a way that sounded guttural as he swung it open wide. I could see inside into the middle of the room, but the darkness swallowed the perimeter beyond. "Come in," was all he said as he boldly stepped in without looking back. Without a word, Jack and I followed him in. The smell was overwhelming as we stepped inside. It smelled musty, earthy, and almost rotten, like a trunk that had been closed for years. I thought the windows looked broken out in places, but there was no air moving through the house now. I don't remember the door shutting, but I felt the uncontrollable urge to run, and I backed right into the shut door. Jack, in a panic, grabbed the handle and wrenched on it, but it didn't budge. He pulled with increased fervor, and I began to hit the door with my closed fist, and my hands began to tingle. I swung around to see the boy standing, looking at us, expressionless. A smile began to creep into the corners of his mouth. This twistedly sick look he began to have made the terror well up even more. As I began to scream at him, he suddenly turned and ran into the darkness, laughing maniacally. I followed a few steps after him instinctively until I realized that giggling, he ran down the stairs. Down the stairs seemed to be even blacker than the darkness that already left navigating nearly impossible. I turned to look at Jack, who was gone. I cried out in fear and frustration at our stupidity. Why would you ever go somewhere with someone you don't know? Yet here I am. Jack stepped forward into my field of vision and grabbed my arm. He began to sob. "What's going on? Where did he go? Why is this place so scary? What's going on?" I pulled him in and put my arm around his shoulder. "Look at me. We are going to get out of here." I said in as calm of a voice as I could muster. I looked to the side to a window and ran to it. I ripped the floor-length velvet curtains open and gasped to see a window. I looked next to me to see a small table and picked it up and banged it on the glass. I wasn't sure what was going on yet, but I wasn't fully committed to breaking out a window because I'm scared. This could be a prank done on poor taste. Fear overwhelmed my rational thoughts, and I swung it. It didn't budge, and I felt as though I were hitting stone. I was even more scared at this abnormal response. I backed up one step and swung as hard as I could to have the table splinter apart, with pieces smashing against the walls, floor, and into my head. I felt the point of impact to reveal on my head a spot of blood on my hand. The window appeared unblemished. As I frantically turned to see Jack crumple into a pile on the floor crying, "I want to go home." I grabbed his collar and pulled him to his feet. I went into the first open door I saw aside from the staircase. "That boy must be in on this. I don't know why he would bring us here, but you can be sure it's not good," I whispered as I pulled Jack along, who was now regaining his composure. The doorway opened into a large room. It appeared to be a library, as books lined the walls to high windows which must have been 3 stories tall, as there were balconies with ladders circumnavigating the room. I pulled us to one side as it seemed to offer a mirage of protection versus being in the room's center. I put a hand against the shelf and looked at the books. Most of the titles were in languages I didn't even recognize, some with what appeared to be symbols only. Breathing hard and looking around for the next move, I noticed there were mounted heads of animals surrounding the room. They were high above the books on the walls. Deer, bear, cougar. They did not have content looks on their faces, rather anger or fear. I looked to the next and found the animal to be beyond description. I stared at its cavorted face and studied it for a moment. It was unknown to me. I glanced ahead and found another unrecognizable head. Upon closer look, I gasped and nearly threw up. It was the head of what looked to be a person, but it had hair all over its face. Its simian likeness was unmistakable, yet it seemed more human. Jack was gasping at me, looking wildly in the direction I had been staring, yelling, "What is it?" He pulled at me to follow him, and I stumbled along. We came to a hallway with opposing doors. At the far end was a door with windows on either side. Long velvet curtains hung parted in the middle, showing the moonlight peeking through. We took pensive steps towards the first door, and I reached out to turn the knob. I cautiously edged the door open and peeked inside. It was too dark to make anything out visually, but I heard sounds. It sounded like some kind of animal was stepping in something wet and sludge-like. Grunting and labored breaths intermixed with ripping sounds came from somewhere within the room. A barely audible whimper was immediately stopped by a low growl. It was then Jack stepped back, and a squeak of the floorboard suddenly alerted whatever was in there. There was a rustling of something moving toward us, and I knew beyond any doubt that I did not want to know what was making that noise. I was able to get us out and slam the door before the thing could get there. Jack was whispering how badly he wanted to leave and clutching my arm in a near frantic manner. I was unsure if we should look in any more rooms or go try to escape from one of the windows at the end of the hall. As I was gathering my wits, I heard another moan. I thought it might have been my imagination, but Jack's face registered that he had heard it as well. "Was that the other boy?" he asked in a whisper. "I don't know," I replied as my voice broke. I had never and have not since known fear such as this. Sweat dripped off my nose, running down my neck and back. I was shaking and could barely speak. I had thrown up again after shutting that door. It just hadn't registered until now. I wiped at my face, and it was apparent I had not been aware enough to make any attempt to project it away from my body. I had a sudden recall that I had my cell phone. Funny how I had argued how I wanted and needed one with my parents and used the safety reason. How ironic, I thought, as I frantically dug it from my pocket. No service. As I thought my spirit couldn't drop farther, the date under the Times seemed to be spinning, like a dial. I had no idea what had happened, but the realization it was broken almost made me cry. If we made it out of there, my parents would kill me for breaking it. I was truly terrified as the tears began to run down my cheeks. I was breathing fast and hard. My head was spinning like I may pass out. Jack's sudden grip on my arm again brought my attention back to reality. We must have been moving the last few moments as we were standing in front of the next door, which, unfortunately, was open. There was a shaft of moonlight coming from the window across the room, and it fell on two of the dirtiest, foulest dogs I had ever seen. My mouth fell open in utter shock at the putrescence of them. They seemed to have what looked like some rotting skin in places. One looked like it was partially disemboweled and something drug on the floor a short distance behind it. The first one lowered his head with a growl, and saliva, or something like it, dripped from the large fangs. It momentarily glistened in the little light present. The smell coming from them was nauseating. Sickly sweet rotting stench with sulphur-esque tones burned my nose as I immediately recoiled from sight and smell. The closer animal, if you could call it that, began to growl, although the sound seemed to emanate from the hole in its side. I pushed Jack ahead of me as panic again rose in me like a wave commanding me to run. In spite of the pathetic creature's aberrant appearance, they could move quickly. Their claws dug to gain purchase on the old floor, shredding with each foot strike. There were snarling, jaws snapping, making saliva fling and spray in the moonlight. Our complete terror must have been adrenaline-fueled enough, as they were nearly to the end of the hall before I realized it. There was a perpendicular hall at the end by the windows, and as Jack was slowing to make a turn, I heard the hounds had stopped or slowed. I turned to look, and they had stopped 20 feet back and were crouching down with tails tucked between their legs, whining, and were turning back as though they were afraid of something. I called to Jack as quietly as possible to get his attention without drawing further alert to our presence. We were stopped by the windows, and I looked out. My parents were walking down the street. My heart soared as I hit the window, screaming their names, completely throwing caution to the wind. They couldn't hear, and kept going as there was no way for them to know I was here. I was supposed to be at the fair. How sorry I was that I hadn't done as I had said. I was going to die in this house. I didn't know what this place was, but it was so much worse than anything I had conjured up as a haunted house in my head. I would have given anything to be with my parents right now. Safe. Not here in this terrible place, whatever this was. I looked down the hall, and at the far end was what looked like an old servant staircase, narrow and steep going down. Wanting to go anywhere but down, I looked the other way and saw a door at the far end, and doors on opposing sides down the hall. More doors made fear well up inside me again. The hair began to stand up on my neck. There was a faint crying sound that was slowly growing louder. Was it a child? A woman? Was it the boy? I couldn't tell, but as it grew louder and louder, it became more distorted. It was a mixture of crying that was morphing from a cry to laughter with choking intermixed. I had never heard a sound like that before, and if I never do again, it would be a blessing. My fear was already overcoming me, and this wretched cacophony was more than I could take. I began to pull Jack to follow me, and we began to run. We sprinted into the hallway blindly in terror. I frantically grabbed at doorknobs to open one, any one of them, in hopes to get refuge from this horror. The light was so low I could barely make out the shapes of the doors. The illumination was minimal, and the color of the walls and doors appeared to be various shades of black. I scraped and patted around what I thought was a door and scrambled along. As I jabbed and reached, as I searched, I felt my fingertip catch on something sharp and my skin hooked on to whatever nail or splinter protruded. I felt the warm fluid spread and drip. As I felt the casing for the knob, I felt my fingernail pull off entirely. In my nearly crazed search for a way out, the dark hall seemed to lighten slightly. The sound was still screeching, crying, laughter constantly, escalating to the point I thought my ears might burst. I felt Jack hitting at me and looked where he was staring. Coming down the hall was something I think no mortal man was meant to see. It was distorted and terrible, flowing with a jerking quality simultaneously. I was suddenly captivated at the indescribable sight approaching. It was sinister, abhorrent, and mesmerizing. I knew if it reached us, all was lost. My hand found the knob that was freezing cold. I turned it. As we fell back with the door opening, I turned quickly to survey and found we were trapped in a closet. In a completely reactionary measure, I slammed the door just as the specter reached us. It roared with an intensity that seemed impossible. It slammed into the door with such violence that shards of wood, dust, and material blew out of the wall, spraying down on us. For an unknown but seemingly endless time, the torrent of anger and pure rage continued to pound upon the door, and I do not know how it did not breach it. At some point it stopped. If possible, the sudden silence was even more deafening. Jack continued to lay on the floor next to me as I lay curled in the fetal position. After an indeterminate amount of time, I began to notice a light coming from under the door. I thought it looked like sunlight. I moved over and tried to peer under. I could see what looked like daylight on the old red carpet. I looked and listened and could perceive nothing outside the door. I reached up and turned the knob. With a creak that was the defining noise of every haunted house ever, the door opened. The hallway was lit with the earliest rays of the beautiful morning sun. It was such a welcome sight to the soul-sucking pitch black of the previous night. As I took in the sunshine, movement in the hall caught my attention, and I recoiled back. The sunlight was just peeking over the horizon through the windows, leaving shadows in between each one. The far end of the hallway was bathed in darkness to the door and beyond. The terrible apparition was hovering just at this boundary of light and dark. It was almost too much for my mind, and I thought I might pass out. It screamed and raged against this boundary, seething and pacing back and forth. It seemed to strain with all its will until the last bit of darkness was abolished with the wonderful sunlight. There was an implosion of sound with some sort of vapor or smoke, and when it dissipated, there was a single sheet with 2 eye holes cut out, perched at the end of the hall where it had been. It seemed almost comical, a cruel and mocking reminder that it was not gone, not truly. We eventually came to the realization that we were able to escape the house only after we passed by the classic ghost. I felt taunted and bullied by it. I wanted to knock it over, but was so repelled by it, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I didn't and don't know what was under the sheet. We made our way through the house. There was no resistance. Windows were broken out, exterior doors left open, absent in some places. As we exited the house, we saw a passing police car and waved it down. The officer listened to both of us trying to relay the story, and he became suddenly very excited when he heard our names. We fell silent as he told us that we had been reported missing 6 days ago, and the entire town had been searching for us. Come to find out, the authorities had actually presumed us dead. My parents were out looking for me when I had seen them. My head beginning to spin was the last thing I remember that day. I'm not sure how many people believed us, if anyone. Jack and I drifted apart as I think both of us couldn't bear the memories of that night. Although thankfully, I have never had another experience such as this. I will never forget that ghost stories aren't always fun. Thrifting Fail. We're now haunted by Bruce Haney. Sarah and Keith's day had been a bust. The young couple had spent the day thrifting and hitting yard sales while trying to find a new vacuum cleaner for their apartment. While they searched, they used half a tank of fuel, went to lunch, and had a good time. But they never did find a reasonably priced vacuum that was to their liking. And for what the day ended up costing them, they could have had a new one shipped to their door. Sarah was excited about her finds. She found a dress that looked new at a thrift store and found a small lamp at a garage sale. Keith was both frugal and particular, so he didn't find much. But on their way home, after they had decided they were done for the day, they saw a sign for a yard sale. "Want to hit it?" Keith asked, then made the turn before she had time to respond. "Sure. Might still find a vacuum," Sarah said. "Wouldn't that be nice?" Keith responded. It had been a lovely day, but as they approached the house with the tables and junk on their lawn, a few clouds in the sky began to shift. They drifted in front of the sun, blocking it and bringing darkness to the street. The yard sale had nothing that interested Sarah, but Keith was drawn to an amateur-looking homemade ceramic bowl. She thought it was ugly, but it was only $1 and Keith was going home with something, so she kept her mouth shut for the time being. Back at their apartment, "What are you going to do with that thing?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Put my keys and wallet in it when I come home, I guess," Keith answered. "Okay," Sarah said. "I was just kind of drawn to the thing. It is kind of cool looking with its uneven shape and poor execution. It's like punk rock pottery," Keith said while turning it over. "I'm surprised that it even has a maker's mark on it," Keith continued. "A maker's mark?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, like how an artist signs their paintings. Someone who does pottery signed the bottom of the piece or stamps their logo or what have you. This one is marked Sylvester," Keith said, and then laughed. "Sylvester?" Sarah asked. "Yep," Keith responded. "Like the actor? I have never heard of someone having that name in real life," Sarah laughed. "Pretty sure it's not the actor," Keith joined in the laughter. It wasn't long after that. Strange things started to happen in their apartment. The first thing, though it went unnoticed by the two, was that the ceramic bowl was never exactly where it was left. It moved an inch or two each time they would leave the room. Keith was the first to notice it, but figured that Sarah had just bumped it. One night when Keith woke up to use the restroom, he found the ceramic piece on the floor. His first fear was that someone had broken in and took his wallet and keys. But he checked, and they were where he left them, just no longer in the bowl. Keith woke up Sarah. She knew nothing about it, so they searched the apartment together looking for other disturbances. With none found, they checked the locks and that the windows were secured before they laid back in bed to go to sleep. 10 minutes later, their alarm went off. It was time to get up for work. When they came home, they felt a false sense of security because the ceramic piece hadn't moved. Well, it had moved a little, but not enough for it to register to them. It was Friday night, so they stayed up watching spooky movies despite their recent experiences. It had been a long week, and they got so little sleep the night before, so before the credits could roll on the first flick, they were fast asleep on the couch. Sarah was the first to wake up and was about to wake up Keith to drag him to bed when she noticed the ceramic bowl sitting on her TV tray. It was next to the diet soda and the oil-free corn-based crackers she had been munching on. Sarah shook Keith to point it out to him. They searched the apartment again, leaving their bedroom for last. They didn't find anything. So they were just about to head to their bedroom when Sarah decided to run back to the living room and grab the ceramic bowl. "What are you doing?" Keith asked. Sarah said nothing as she walked to the kitchen and put the bowl in the freezer. "Let's see it move around the apartment now." She gave Keith a little smile and headed to their room. In their room, there was a shape under their blanket. The shape of a large man. When Keith hit the light switch, the shape deflated and the blanket fell back to the bed. That night, they slept on the couch using a spare blanket from the closet so they didn't have to use the one from their bed. It was a bit thin and scratchy, but it wasn't recently involved in a haunting, so they made do. Sarah again was the first one to awaken, but this time it was because of the cold feeling she felt on her right shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she saw a big man standing in front of her, leaning over and touching her shoulder. The cold radiated from that spot, and she began to feel chills all over. She knew the person touching her wasn't of this world because she could see through him, and there was a blue glow surrounding him. Sarah looked him over, noticing his disheveled appearance. His apron, his shirt, and pants were covered in paint and bits of clay from where he had used them to wipe his hands off while working. His teeth chattered as he spoke. "Sorry to disturb you, miss, but I'm freezing," the ghost pleaded. Sarah just stared at him, never taking her eyes off the apparition as she hit Keith to wake him up. By the time Keith awoke, it had lost its courteous demeanor, and a scowl began to form on his face. Keith screamed when he saw him. Then the ghost screamed while moving his gaze from Sarah to Keith. "I'm cold!" the ghost yelled. "What?" Keith stammered. "I said I am freezing!" As the ghost began to head towards Keith, something clicked in Sarah's head. She jumped from the couch and ran to the freezer, where she opened the door and grabbed out the ceramic bowl. She then turned around to show the ghost. But he was gone. Sarah and Keith spent the next morning driving around, trying to find the house they had bought the bowl from, so they could return it. Sarah was sure she knew the way, but without the signs and the tables of junk in the yard, it was hard to determine which house it was. Eventually, they agreed on a house that they believed it could be. Nobody answered the door, but they had been expecting that after spotting the for sale sign on the lawn. "What do we do now?" Keith asked. "I don't know. I don't think we're going to get any answers this way. We should just throw it out," Sarah responded. Before they went back home, they stopped at the coffee shop where they had their first date. It was Sarah's turn to buy, so Keith found them a comfortable spot to sit so they could talk. While he waited for her, he got on his phone and did a couple of quick searches. When Sarah came with their coffees, he was ready to tell her what he'd found out. As she handed him his quad shot over ice, he told her all about Sylvester. "I don't know the connection to that house, but I think I found information on our Sylvester. He was actually a respected artist," Keith said. "But that thing was so amateurish," Sarah argued. "True. Do you remember when you first started painting last summer?" Keith asked. "Oh, God, I'm glad I tossed all those awful early paintings," Sarah replied. "Well, Sylvester, like you, got much better. According to his Wikipedia page..." "Wait, he has a Wikipedia page? It's not the actor, is it?" Sarah interrupted. "No, it's not the actor. His name was Sylvester Helm. Displays of his paintings and ceramics can be found in museums all over the world," Keith said, reading a sentence from his Wikipedia page. "You bought that thing for $1. How can you be so sure it's the same guy?" Sarah asked. Keith responded by handing her his phone. On the screen was a picture of his maker's mark on the bottom of a ceramic piece. "It does look similar, but that could easily be faked," Sarah said with a little doubt in her voice. "Scroll," Keith said. Sarah did until she saw a photo of the artist, who bore more than a striking resemblance to the frozen man she had seen in their apartment. "Yeah, I think it's him," Keith said. "Crazy," Sarah said. "Keep scrolling to the death section," Keith instructed. Sarah read the short blurb out loud. Sylvester Leroy Helm is assumed dead. The artist was last seen in 2010 at an antiquarian book fair. Helms had been a lifetime collector of rare and obscure books of the occult. After his disappearance, his aunt became the heir to his fortune and reported that many of his rare books were missing. A death in absentia was completed in 2017, as he is presumed dead. Wow, so what does all that mean? Why does that equal us being haunted? Sarah asked Keith in a whisper so other people in the coffee shop wouldn't hear. "I don't know. I don't think we have enough pieces of the puzzle to figure it out," Keith said. "So we need to figure out what the next step is to figure this out," Sarah said. "Or we just don't pursue this further," Keith said. "Why not?" Sarah inquired. "Have you ever read H.P. Lovecraft? Or watched The Blair Witch Project?" Keith asked. "No and yes," Sarah responded. "Okay, good. Have you ever noticed that trend in horror movies that have a deep lore or mystery to them? That as the people search, they become more and more screwed and eventually go mad, disappear, or get killed. I mean, look at Sylvester here. He did just that. He looked for evil until it found him. Now, he's stuck in the worst piece of art he ever created. Yes, I want to know what happened, but I'm not trading this beautiful life we built together for that," Keith said. "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "Could destroy it," Keith said. "But we don't know what that will do. Look what happened when we put it in the freezer. What if it appears in front of us all mutilated and gross from being broken apart?" Sarah said. "Do you think that's what'll happen?" Keith asked. "We have no clue, and without further research, we won't," Sarah said. When they arrived back at the apartment, Sarah took the bowl out of her purse and set it on the counter. "What can we do for you?" Sarah whispered towards it, not wanting Keith to hear her. No response came, so she followed it up with another question. "Are you stuck?" Sarah asked. Again, no response. Keith walked into the room and saw her talking to the bowl and decided that he had a plan. Keith walked over and snatched up the bowl, then headed to the front door. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "I'm going to throw it away," Keith responded. "But what about when it goes into the garbage truck and gets smashed? It seems like, from the freezer situation, he can feel pain. That wouldn't be right for us to do. He is scary, but I'm not sure he's evil," Sarah explained. Keith thought about this for a moment. "What if I just leave it on the side of the street?" Keith asked. "Same result. It'll end up in the trash," Sarah responded. Okay. How about I give it to a thrift store?" Keith asked. "Okay, yeah, I'm okay with that," Sarah said. That plan didn't work. By the time they arrived home after donating it, it was back on their counter. Later that night, they went back to plotting how to get rid of the thing. After the scare of the cabinet, Sarah was warming up to the idea of just destroying the thing. There must be another way. Why is it attached to us? What makes us so special? Keith asked. "We bought it," Sarah responded. They both stared at each other for a moment. That was the key. The purchase is what had attached them to it. "We have to sell it," Sarah told him. "Yeah, we might even make a pretty penny, being that it's an authentic Sylvester Helms piece." But every auction house and antique store laughed at them when they presented the piece. Nobody believed that it could be the work of the renowned Sylvester Helms. So, they did what anyone else would do in that situation. They threw it up on a popular online auction site and hoped for the best. That night, they didn't wake up when their covers were pulled from them. Sarah did wake up when she felt a hand on her ankle. She woke up Keith with her screams and the loud bang that came from her body, hitting the floor. They both knew things were escalating, and they hoped it would sell quickly. They watched the auction eagerly, but Sarah began to have a change of heart. "I'm not sure it's right to sell it," Sarah said. "I don't care if it is. You could have gotten really hurt," Keith responded. The ankle incident was scary, but is it fair to curse someone else with this? What if something worse happens to them? Sarah asked. What if they knew it was haunted? Would it be okay then? Keith asked. Yeah, then they know what they're getting into. I think that would be fair, Sarah responded. With that, Keith changed the title of the listing to Haunted Ceramic Bowl, Scary Item. Then, in the description, he wrote about what had happened to them. Then, something told him to list the item higher. Asking $150 instead of $8 would make it feel more legitimate. An hour later, the item sold. The next day, they mailed the package off, and they never saw the ceramic bowl or the ghost again. With the $150, they bought a new vacuum cleaner and swore off thrifting, antiquing, and all yard sales from then on out.
Lucien Greyshire and the Ghost from Applebee's by L.F. Falconer. The three young girls in the corner booth continued to stare. Not due to rudeness, Lucien determined, merely out of morbid curiosity. Their parents attempted to be more furtive in their sidelong glances and struggled with useless, hushed commands to curtail their daughter's blatant surveillance. Lucien no longer cared. With 3/4 of his body severely scarred from a house fire he'd survived as a child 40 years ago, he'd grown hardened to the horrified scrutiny of others, the secretive glimpses, the whispers behind his back. At one time, his disfigurements brought him shame. Now he wore these scars with honor, deeming his outer grotesqueness more valuable than his business card. A man no one truly wanted to see, yet one not so easily forgotten. If he caused anyone nightmares along his journey through life, he lost no sleep over it. Harried to the point of distraction by their children, the two adults in the corner booth remained oblivious to the fact that half their current troubles were caused by the antics of the youthful poltergeist hovering above their table. A spilled glass of milk, the forks fallen to the floor, the plate of French fries toppled onto the youngest girl's lap had nothing to do with the carelessness of rambunctious children, and at this moment the ghost was ever so slowly unscrewing the cap on the salt shaker. Lucien savored the final bite of his lemon chicken, then dabbed his napkin over the thin lips below the cartilaginous remnants of his nose. He rose to his feet and placed enough cash on his meal check to cover his lunch as well as a generous tip. In response to his appearance, the server had neither balked nor overcompensated. Shrugging on his wool jacket, he took pity on the beleaguered parents in their challenge to maintain a sense of decorum amid the chaos, especially as the children's father had just ruined his own meal with a full shaker of salt spilled upon it. The poltergeist above the table glowed in rapid pulses of jade green. Leaving his table, Lucien limped directly to the booth the family occupied. Everyone at the table fell, transfixed, as if they'd all just been caught with their hands in the till. Lucien greeted them with a courteous bow. "Good afternoon." He raised his one good eye to acknowledge the ghost hovering above. Bemusedly, the ghost cocked an eyebrow, then darted to the left side of the table, taking refuge behind a potted imitation philodendron. Lucien straightened his gaunt frame and withdrew a business card from his inner jacket pocket. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Lucien Greyshire, and I have a business proposal if you'd be interested." He handed his card to the father, then glanced over at the ghost who peeked through the Kelly green leaves, giving the young shade a polite nod. The man at the table seemed hesitant to accept the card, but once he took it into his possession, he scanned it out loud. "Let the dead bring your party to life. Greyshire Incorporated. Unique Halloween entertainment services." He looked up at Lucien with knitted brows. "What's this about?" "I'm in need of an assistant events coordinator." Lucien glanced back over at the ghost. "If you're interested, meet me in the park across the street within the hour." He kept his one-eyed gaze on the ghost. "I already have a job." The man at the table tried to hand the business card back, but Lucien stepped away from the table and gave another slight bow. "I'll be waiting should you be interested." His papery lips smiled at the ghost before he turned and departed the restaurant. A somber sky loomed above, gray with pewter clouds billowing like dust. Lucien breathed deeply of the air, still wet from last night's tempest and laced with faint hints of pine, damp bark, and blight. Dying boughs and limbs ripped from their hosts and tossed haphazardly by the uncaring gale littered the park's greensward. Lucien blessed the previous night's storm. The howling winds had covered every muffled scream. The man's name had been Daniel. He was 67 years old, and now he was dead. October leaves in persimmon, amber, and blood crunched beneath Lucien's feet, while crisp Lake Erie air nipped at his exposed, disfigured flesh. He settled onto a park bench, his muscles aching, strained from last night's activities. Out of his jacket pocket, he removed a well-used paperback copy of Peter Nichols' A Day in the Death of Joe Egg. He'd barely read 3 pages when an adolescent apparition tentatively drifted near. Lucien looked up from his book. Though little more than a translucent shadow, the ghost featured a clinging wet t-shirt, dark jeans, and high-top athletic shoes. He looked to have been maybe 15 or 16 at the time of his death, his dark, damp ribbons of hair plastered against his skull. Last night's events flickered through Lucien's mind in high-speed clips. Cold waters whipped to a frenzy by boisterous wind, Daniel's hand clawing at Lucien's own as he gurgled within the spume. The young shade scooted swiftly to the left. With a steady gaze, Lucien's good eye trailed the movement. The shade darted back to the right, still fixed beneath Lucien's magnetic stare. The ghost took a minor step closer. "You can really see me?" Lucien closed his book. "Indeed." "Was this job offer really for me or, for him?" The ghost jerked his head in the direction of the restaurant across the street. "For you, of course. I thought I'd made that pretty clear." "You was a bit fuzzy, mate." "I believe it would have been awkward to speak to you directly when it's only I who am aware of your presence. I'm not certain why you're trying to pull off a phony accent. I happen to know you're an American." The ghost took a step back, crossing his arms. "And what makes you so smart, huh?" Lucien winked his sighted eye. "I know many things. It's what I do." The ghost jutted his chin forward. "But I guess you don't know my mum's Canadian." Lucien flipped his jacket collar up to keep the lake-chilled air off his neck. "Point taken, but that's neither here nor there. The important thing is that you've come. You may call me Lucien, and what may I call you?" "Anything you like, I suppose. In another life, I believe they called me Patrick, but can't recall the last time I heard the name. Could just be a name I like. I don't know. There's not much about life I can remember." He relaxed, looking Lucien directly in the eye. "It's kind of like a shattered mirror, life, I mean. My life. And I'm afraid if I try to put the pieces back together, I might not like what I see. Other than looking like a drowned rat, you're not a bad-looking fellow." The ghost faded slightly. "It's not about my looks. I'm invisible, unlike you. Meaning, no offense, but dude, really." Lucien shook his head. "No offense taken, and there's no need to pick up the pieces. It could do you no good now." He swiftly caught a wayward breeze-blown newspaper page beneath his foot, anchoring it to the ground. "Patrick it is, then. The name suits you, so tell me, Patrick, would you like the job?" Patrick settled onto the seat beside him. "What's in it for me? I'm free to come and go as I please, and don't have to answer to anyone." "I dare say you're rather bored." And lonely, Lucien thought, a feeling he knew too well, being little more than a living wraith himself. But what a pitiful way to spend eternity, tormenting children in a restaurant, and an Applebee's no less. "Ah, that's where you're wrong, mate. I've no ties to the restaurant, and I wasn't tormenting the children. I was tormenting the parents." "You hold a grudge against parents, do you?" "It would seem that way now, wouldn't it? But I can't say for sure. Could just be something I do for kicks, you know. Probably one of those broken pieces." Patrick leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So, how come you can see me and hear me when no one else can?" The crackle of flames and the smell of charred wood inundated Lucien's memory. Smoke billowing beneath the locked bedroom door. On the other side, his father shouts. Heavy footfalls. Leaving. "Help me, Daddy!" Lucien's frantic cries. Eyes burning, throat constricting, hot smoke wrapping him in a shroud. "I was dead once myself," he admitted, glancing over at the ghost beside him. "A fireman resuscitated me." He had been brought back to life. His mother and brother had been more fortunate, not having to live the ordeal over and over and over again. The nightmares had long ago disappeared, making way for vivid, waking memories. Patrick straightened in his seat. "That's how you got all them scars, eh? That's rough, man. But that don't explain much. Other folks have been resuscitated, but no one's ever seen me before, so why you?" For nearly a year during my recovery, I remained in a state of flux, or half-life, if you will. Forced against his will into a world of forgotten shadows, Lucien continued to keep one foot in reality, and the other foot in the grave. A part of me still dwells in the realm of lost souls. Some people might consider that a curse, but I view it as a unique gift, for I am in a position to offer those in limbo some comfort. "Limbo sucks, especially if you're invisible." Patrick's voice broke upon his words. It was impossible to give the boy a hug. Lucien had to rely on speech. "That's why you feel compelled to cause chaos. It's the only way you can validate your dismal existence." Patrick leaned back, clasped his hands and twiddled his thumbs, staring up at the steely, cloud-studded sky. A pair of starlings roosted, chattering quietly in the bare treetops above. Patrick shot up like a rocket and thumped the branch, startling the birds into flight. As Patrick settled back onto the bench beside him, Lucien stowed his book away in his pocket. "What I am offering you, Patrick, is a chance to do something productive with your existence. I could use a man of your talents. I have no talent, but you do. Very few spirits have the ability to move objects. I can only do it if they're not too heavy. I can't budge anything over a couple of pounds, and I don't know why you'd want a limbo ghost anyway. We're a pathetic bunch. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, bored, like you said, and boring to boot. I can do nothing about whatever is holding you here, but I can offer you a sense of purpose. After tomorrow, I'll be moving on. This is an opportunity you may never come across again." Patrick kicked at the leaves below his feet, swirling them in a colorful dance upon the sidewalk. "Doing what exactly?" "Helping me in my endeavors. That's all." "What kind of endeavors? What do you do besides know many things?" "Well, for one, I throw parties. Huge Halloween parties for the filthy rich. Excruciating extravaganzas, really. But I always deliver on my clients' contracts, and they're willing to pay me quite well." "Parties, huh? I think there's more to it than that. You said for one, so what's for two? Talented and attentive. Even better, Lucien thought, allowing his good eye to wander the immediate vicinity for a moment. The threat of more stormy weather kept the park relatively deserted. Ensured there was no one nearby, he quietly confided. For two, I kill people. Patrick sprang from the bench. Hold a minute! He raised his hand in a stop action and took a step back. Tormenting folks is one thing, but I want no part in killing innocents. Unapologetically, Lucien stared up at him. Only children are innocent. The rest of us are all guilty of something. Think of me as an extension of justice. Are you like some kind of hitman, or do people only pay you for parties? Lucien hesitated momentarily. I do get paid for hosting parties. Quite well, in fact. Yet there are some clients who request an extra dash of pepper on their salad, so to speak. Patrick paced the concrete, stirring the leaves beneath his feet back into action. I don't know, mate. I start doing real harm to folks, and next thing you know, I'm yanked straight into hell. Lucien folded his gnarled hands, his sightless eye gleaming dully in the muted daylight. I would never ask you to harm anyone. That pleasure is reserved for me, and me alone. I simply need help in orchestrating my events, hence the job title of Assistant Events Coordinator. Your soul and conscience remain unsullied. A young couple holding hands strolled by, giving Lucien a wide berth. They passed through Patrick, causing him to fade in and out. He stopped pacing and lunged towards Lucien. Ripping the newspaper page from beneath his foot, he swatted the couple with it on the back of their heads before setting the page free in the breeze. His bone-colored face distorted by deep thought. He swept back to Lucien's side. I'm still not sure this is something I should be taking part in, if you know what I mean, he muttered. The killing part. I understand your concerns, Patrick. Yet you seem to enjoy tormenting the living, and that's all I would ever expect you to do. During the party. Would you be willing to give it a trial run? I have an event scheduled tomorrow night at Gates Hotel. A party at the Gates? Patrick snorted and took a step back. Well, that should be a hoot. Those two snobby sisters there don't much care for company, dead or alive, carrying on like the world belongs to only them. That's odd, Lucien said. I found them to be rather charming. It had been those sisters who'd led him to Patrick, who'd told him of the boy's talent and revealed the details of his untimely death. And since the hotel is slated to be razed before Christmas, Jasmine and Ruby have graciously agreed to help me host this year's event. One last hurrah for them, so to speak. With them two, you've already got the best. What do you need me for? Lucien spoke with a smile. The sisters may be capable of vivid manifestation and bone-chilling audio, but they cannot move things. The party guests will be expecting a magnificent, haunted experience. I prefer to give them a night to truly remember. A green aura glowed from within, and Patrick smiled. Most of these people are parents, right? I would assume so. And I don't have to take part in no killing? Lucien nodded. Rest assured, that contract has already been completed. A small white lie. Sometimes a party was simply a party, and a target a deliciously convenient coincidence. Patrick gusted across the sidewalk, knocking the hat off the woman pushing a baby carriage, then sidled back to Lucien's side. Can I ask who it was? No, you may not. Not even a clue? Lucien ran a ragged finger across the thinly stretched skin of his missing lips, as if zipping them shut. There was no need to tell the lad. It had been his father. Lucien's own father may have been unsuccessful, but Patrick's had seen the deed through. For 30 years, Patrick has wandered in the realm of lost souls, and last night, the father, like the son, unwillingly surrendered his life within the cold, dark waters of Lake Erie. He wondered, had Patrick fought as hard to survive as Daniel had? Lucien rose from the bench. Stick with me, Patrick, and I promise you will never be forced to carry the burdens of my sin. Now, shall we go? There's a pair of fine 19th century sisters I'd like you to meet." Lucien limped down the walkway, the leaves beside him swirling in a kaleidoscopic dance. The House in the Woods by Bruce Haney. Dear Sarah, I hope you never have to read this letter. You know all my stories and secrets, except for this incident. I never told you about it because I don't like to think about it. Even in my own mind, I try to pretend like it never happened. The sights I saw feel impossible to have been true. It was in my 27th year that I came upon that house. It was while I was hiking alone in the Alder Creek forest. Rumor had it that an old abandoned village was deep in the woods, a village whose prosperous years ended some hundreds of years ago when the town of Shaniko became the wool capital of the world, and no one needed the wool from the town of Alder any longer. A similar thing happened to Shaniko a few years later when people again found wool cheaper elsewhere. But that is not this story. That isn't my story. My story is about the first time I searched for Alder and found a different place. One not found on any map, a place I plan on going again tomorrow. But before I go, I felt I should write up my experience in case I don't make it back. I am writing this just so that you know what happened. I plead to you, do not come to look for me or send anyone to find me. As I told you before, it was many years ago that I ventured into these woods. I hope that enough time has passed since I was last out there that it will now be safe, because I am in desperate need of what I found out there. I could save you, dear. Only for you would I ever think of entering into those woods again. Only the love I have for you. I am scared of how scared I am. Even to write this down, I am trembling. But I must get this written, as the night is passing so quickly, and soon it shall be time to journey once again into those woods. It was a bright, sunny day when I first went looking for Alder, and I was feeling quite optimistic about my journey. I brought my pack, a small tent, and I was using a map I found in an old book called Ghost Towns of the Northwest to guide me. I mentioned the town of Alder, but I never actually found Alder. I got lost and way off track. I worried that I was lost as I had walked at least 3 miles past the distance I was supposed to have been walking. It was getting near dark when I came across something peculiar. All the way out there, deep in the woods, where no man would need to wander, I came across a carved jack-o'-lantern. It was a misshapen pumpkin. It was taller than it was round, much like a human head, but larger overall. It was oddly shaped and more bulbous on the left than the right, which made its single-toothed smile look like the grotesque, rotten mouth of an elderly man who has suffered a stroke. Inside I could see something shiny. My curiosity took hold of me, and I bent down to give the ugly thing a closer look. The first thing I noticed was the eyes were unlike any I had ever seen carved into a gourd before. Each spot where an eye would be was 4 holes, giving it the appearance of having 8 eyes. After examining the mouth and then the eyes, I looked upon the nose with greater concentration. Something seemed off. When I touched it, I noticed some movement behind. Before I could react, I realized what it was. But it was too late. The pumpkin was home to a nest of spiders that quickly made their escape out of the pumpkin and up my arm. I ripped off my coat and threw it as far as I could before starting the task of wiping off the remaining spiders from my arm. Then I stopped, because I was stunned. I glanced at the pumpkin and saw that the top of it was rising up and off. I was in such a state of fear that I just stood there watching while a giant spider squeezed out of the pumpkin. It was the scariest thing I had ever seen up to that point. Imagine a black spider the size of a baseball glove that is dripping with pumpkin guts. I continued to stare until the spider turned and looked right at me. I must have run 2 miles before I finally felt safe enough to stop, and then I only stopped long enough to catch my breath. Now that I was even deeper in the woods and completely lost, I decided it was best to try to head back out of the woods. I could find Alder another time. I figured it would be about 3 hours of hiking to get back to where I had entered the woods. But after walking 100 feet back, fog rolled in all around me. It would have been truly foolish to try to find my way back through the dense mist. So, with disappointment, I gave up on trying to make it out of the woods that night. I set up my small tent and climbed inside, and right before I went to sleep, I remember thinking, God, please don't let that spider find its way to me. I was awoken in the middle of the night when I heard a sound that was much like a door slamming. My brain was full of questions. Was that a car door? Am I that close to the road? Am I so lost that I'm nearly out of the woods? I broke down my tent, packed up, and then made my way towards the noise. Luckily, the fog had lifted some, for the moment at least. I started to think that maybe the sound had just been in my head, but then I saw a light in the distance. Then the scent hit me. It was fire. Oh my God, the woods are on fire, I thought. They must be. I'm way too far out in the woods for there to be someone else out here. But of course, there was that horrible pumpkin. Someone had carved that ugly thing. I walked slowly in the direction of the fire. Step by step, I listened until I arrived just outside of the clearing and the blaze of the fire. The woods were not on fire. I was relieved that this was a human-created, controlled fire. It wasn't that cold out, but I certainly missed my coat, so I approached the fire and stood there for a bit to warm up. I hadn't seen a person yet, but I noticed other queer things around. There was a chair that was crude in appearance. It was made from scraps of trees. The base was a log and the back support was made from branches nailed to it. Behind the big flames of this bonfire, I could see a house. Well, a house is a bit of an exaggeration. It was somewhere in between a shack and a house. I walked around the tree line to get a better view of the structure. It was old. The architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen. The roof was completely flat, and the house had more windows than walls. Windows that fogged and cracked from age. Some of the cracks in the windows had been filled with dirt or clay. The place gave me the creeps, and a feeling of dread swept over me, especially when I spotted more of those jack-o'-lanterns. There must have been a pumpkin patch around there somewhere. I was afraid that they would contain more giant black spiders. God, I may never sleep soundly again after this trip, I had thought. Instead of running, I found myself approaching the house, thinking that maybe the occupant could help me find my way out of these woods, or at least provide a shelter for the night where I wouldn't have to worry about giant arachnids. Before knocking, I decided to peek through the window. The inside was nicer than I would have imagined. It was filled with old furnishing, but not as weathered as the outside of the house. An antique collector would be ecstatic to come across such a find. There was a beautiful old couch and chair set. Both were covered in velvet with detailed carvings in the wood. There was also what looked to be a solid oak table, but what really drew me in was an ancient-looking trunk that was covered in tan leather similar to the color of human skin. It wasn't made with the same craftsmanship as the other furnishings. The seams were big and black and went all over the place like it was made from scraps of skin. I was about to walk to the door when I saw the inhabitant enter the room. I could only see the right side of his face, but the man looked as old as that trunk with skin that looked just as leathery. He had unkempt hair and an even longer beard. He walked over and opened the trunk, and inside it was full of what appeared to be gold and silver coins. I stood there awestruck until he turned to me. I was shocked by his appearance. The right side of his face was sloped, just like that pumpkin. His smile revealed just one tooth, and yes, just like that pumpkin, he had 8 eyes. I have never been so scared in my life. That is until a moment later, when his extra 2 arms and 2 legs sprung out of his body, tearing apart his fake skin suit, revealing him to be a giant, ugly, black spider. I ran at an Olympic gold medal winning pace out of those woods. When I finally got out, I was miles from my car. I never went back for that car, and I never went near those woods again. I know a bigger man would have gone back for all that gold, but it wasn't worth losing my life or even just seeing that thing again. That was enough of a deterrent. But now, Sarah, my wife, you are sick, and the operation is more than we can afford, so this is my only choice. Really, it is no choice. I love you more than I care for my own safety. Hopefully, I make it back. Hopefully, this is not the last sentence I will ever write.
Well, my spookies, if you made it through all 6 of those, well, congratulations. You're officially the kind of person who hears, "Do not enter," and immediately starts looking for a flashlight with some fresh batteries. We went from haunted rooms to murder houses, from fairground nightmares to cursed thrift store finds, from restaurant ghosts to a house in the woods that feels like it was built on bad decisions and old screams, and now you're sitting there in the dark doing that thing where you pretend you're not hearing footsteps in the hallway. Here's what I want to know. Which story got you the worst? Was it the one that made you stare at a shadow for a little too long? The one that made your stomach drop? The one that made you think, okay, nope, absolutely not. And if you're still in the mood for more, don't worry. The feed is always hungry, so subscribe and come back next time. Because there's always another door, another basement, another great deal you should have left on the table. Sleep tight, my spookies.